February 14th, 1943. Over the Solomon Islands. The morning sun burned through the haze, casting a golden shimmer across the restless Pacific. Below, the jungle canopy stretched endlessly, broken only by the jagged scars of war, smoking craters, shattered palm trees, and the faint glint of wreckage. Above it all, the roar of radial engines shattered the silence. Captain James "Jim" Sweat of Marine Fighting Squadron 221 tightened his grip on the stick of his brand-new F4U Corsair. The cockpit rattled as the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp thundered at full throttle, its 2,000 horsepower straining against the air. The gull-shaped wings, the bent-wing bird as crews called it, cut through the sky with a predatory grace. Ahead, a swarm of Mitsubishi A6M Zeros glinted in the sunlight, their formation tight, their movements fluid. Japanese pilots had seen these new American machines before. They laughed at them in briefings, calling them bloated, clumsy, too heavy to dance with the nimble Zero. Today, they would test that theory. Sweat's radio crackled. Bandits, 11 o'clock high. His squadron broke formation, Corsairs banking hard, wings flexing under the strain. The Japanese pilots dove with confidence, their green-painted fighters slicing through the air like blades. The first pass was brutal. Tracers stitched the sky, and the Corsair's 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns spat fire. Sweat lined up a Zero, squeezed the trigger, and watched as rounds tore through its fuselage. The enemy fighter erupted in flame, spiraling into the jungle below. But the Zeros were relentless. One slipped on his Sweat's tail, its 20mm cannon flashing. Explosions rattled his cockpit, shards of canopy glass spraying across his flight suit. He yanked the stick, rolling the Corsair into a dive. The Zero followed, confident in its agility. Then the Corsair revealed its secret. At high speed, the clumsy, bent-wing bird transformed. Its massive engine gave it unmatched acceleration in a dive, and its rugged frame held together where lighter Japanese planes faltered. Sweat pulled into a climbing turn, the Zero struggling to keep pace. In seconds, the hunter became the hunted. Sweat's guns roared again. Another Zero disintegrated, its wings shearing off in midair. The Marine captain didn't stop. He pressed the attack, weaving through the formation with ferocity. By the end of the engagement, he had downed 7 enemy aircraft in a single mission, earning the Medal of Honor. The Japanese pilots who survived limped back to base, shaken. Their laughter about the slow, heavy Corsair had vanished. They had seen firsthand that the bent-wing bird was no joke. It was a predator. Yet, in Tokyo, many still dismissed the Corsair. Reports claimed it was too dangerous to land on carriers, too unwieldy for dogfights. The Zero, they insisted, remained supreme. But in the jungles of the Solomons, in the skies above Bougainville and Rabaul, the truth was already unfolding. The Corsair was rewriting the rules of aerial combat. March 1943. Rabaul, New Britain. The Japanese airfield buzzed with activity. Mechanics wiped sweat from their brows as they tuned the Nakajima engines of the A6M Zero, while pilots lounged in the shade, smoking and laughing. Word had spread of the new American fighter, the bent-wing bird. To many, it was a curiosity, a lumbering brute that looked more like a failed experiment than a threat. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most celebrated aces, listened as younger pilots mocked the Corsair. Too big, one sneered. Too heavy. It cannot dance with the Zero. Another added, it is like a flying barn. We will cut it to pieces. Their confidence was unshaken, forged by years of dominance in the Pacific skies. But the next day, reality struck. At dawn, a formation of Zeros lifted off, climbing into the humid air. Their mission, intercept American bombers approaching Bougainville. As they reached altitude, dark specks appeared on the horizon. Not bombers, fighters. Corsairs. The Japanese pilots dove in, expecting easy kills. Yet as they closed, the Corsairs did not scatter. They held formation, engines snarling, wings flexing like predators ready to strike. The first clash was sudden and violent. A Zero latched onto the tail of a Corsair, cannon fire flashing. But the American pilot shoved the throttle forward, and the double wasp roared. The Corsair surged ahead, leaving the Zero gasping in its wake. The Japanese pilot tried to follow, but his engine strained, his wings shuddered. He broke off, stunned. Another Zero attempted a tight turn, expecting the Corsair to stall. Instead, the bent-wing fighter rolled smoothly, its massive frame cutting through the maneuver with surprising agility. The American guns thundered, and the Zero exploded in a ball of fire. Within minutes, the sky was littered with wreckage. Corsairs dove and climbed with brutal efficiency, their speed unmatched, their firepower devastating. The Japanese formation disintegrated, pilots fleeing for survival. Back at Rabaul, silence replaced laughter. Reports trickled in, kill ratios that defied belief. 11 Zeros lost for every Corsair. The flying barn had become a nightmare. Sakai himself admitted later that the Corsair was unlike anything Japan had faced. Its speed in a dive, its ruggedness under fire, its sheer power, all combined to make it a predator the Zero could not match. The mockery was gone. In its place was fear. For the Americans, the Corsair was more than a fighter. It was a symbol of resilience, a machine that embodied the industrial might of the United States. For the Japanese, it was a harbinger of defeat, a reminder that their era of aerial supremacy was ending. November 1943. Bougainville, Solomon Islands. The jungle below was alive with chaos, smoke rising from artillery strikes, the thunder of naval guns echoing from offshore. Above it all, the sky belonged to the fighters. Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, commander of Marine Fighter Squadron 214, the famed Black Sheep, leaned forward in his cockpit, eyes locked on the horizon. His Corsair, painted in dark navy blue, shimmered under the tropical sun. Boyington had heard the rumors. Japanese pilots still believed the Zero could outmaneuver anything. Today, he intended to prove them wrong. The Black Sheep squadron climbed into formation, engines snarling like a pack of wolves. Suddenly, the call came over the radio, "Bandits inbound, 20+." The Zeros appeared in a loose swarm, their green silhouettes darting across the sky. They dove with confidence, expecting the Americans to scatter. But Boyington barked into the radio, "Hold formation. Let them come." The clash was immediate. Corsairs rolled into the attack, their gull wings slicing through the air. Boyington spotted a Zero diving on his wingman. He banked hard, pulling into a steep climb. The Corsair's massive engine roared, propeller biting into the humid air. The Zero tried to follow, but stalled, its lightweight frame unable to keep pace. Boyington swung behind the enemy fighter, lined up his sights, and unleashed a torrent of .50 caliber fire. The Zero disintegrated, fragments scattering across the sky. Elsewhere, the Black Sheep tore into the formation. Corsairs dove like hawks, their speed unmatched. Zeros tried to twist away, but the Americans pressed relentlessly, their firepower shredding wings and fuselages. Within minutes, the battle was decided. The Japanese formation collapsed, survivors fleeing toward Rabaul. The Corsairs regrouped, their radios alive with victory calls. Boyington himself claimed multiple kills that day, adding to a tally that would eventually make him one of America's top aces. Word spread quickly among Japanese squadrons. The Corsair was no longer a curiosity, it was a nightmare. Reports described its terrifying dive speed, its ability to absorb punishment, its devastating firepower. Pilots whispered of kill ratios so lopsided they seemed impossible. 11 Zeros destroyed for every Corsair lost. For the Americans, the bent-wing bird had become a symbol of dominance. For the Japanese, it was a harbinger of defeat. The skies of the Pacific were changing, and the Corsair was leading the charge. January 1944. Espiritu Santo, New Hebrides. The Corsair sat on the deck, its bent wings folded like a predator at rest. Mechanics swarmed around it, checking fuel lines, tightening bolts, and wiping oil from the cowling. The aircraft had already earned its reputation in the Solomons, but whispers still lingered among Navy crews. Too dangerous for carriers. Too heavy for deck landings. Lieutenant Commander Tommy Blackburn, leader of VF-17, the Jolly Rogers, knew those doubts well. His squadron had been pulled from carrier duty after early accidents, forced to operate from island bases instead. But Blackburn believed in the Corsair. He had seen its speed, its firepower, its ability to shred Zeros in combat. He was determined to prove it belonged on the front line. That morning, VF-17 launched from Espiritu Santo, climbing into the humid skies. Their mission, intercept Japanese raiders heading toward the fleet. The Corsairs rose in formation, gull wings gleaming against the sun. The enemy appeared suddenly, dozens of Zeros, their formation tight, their confidence unshaken. They dove in, expecting to scatter the Americans. But Blackburn's squadron held firm. The clash was ferocious. Corsairs dove like hawks, their engines howling. Zeros twisted desperately, but the Americans pressed the attack. Blackburn himself lined up a target, his guns blazing. The Zero erupted in flame, spiraling into the sea. Around him, his pilots scored kill after kill, their Corsairs dominating the sky. By the end of the engagement, VF-17 had destroyed nearly 24 enemy aircraft, with minimal losses. The kill ratio was staggering, proof that the Corsair was not just a match for the Zero, but its superior. Back at base, Blackburn gathered his men. Their faces were smeared with sweat and oil, but their eyes burned with pride. The Corsair had carried them through, proving its worth in the crucible of combat. Word spread quickly across the Pacific. The bent-wing bird was no longer a liability, it was a weapon of dominance. Though carrier landings remained treacherous, the Navy adapted, refining techniques, strengthening decks, and training pilots to master the beast. Soon, Corsairs would return to carriers, ready to unleash their fury across the Pacific. For the Japanese, the message was clear. The days of mocking the Corsair were over. The bent-wing Predator had claimed the skies, and every Zero that rose to meet it risked becoming another statistic in its devastating kill ratio. June 1944. The Mariana Islands. The Pacific boiled with war. American carriers steamed in vast formations, their decks crowded with aircraft painted in navy blue. The Corsair, once doubted, now stood proudly among them, its bent wings folded neatly, waiting for the signal to launch. Lieutenant Junior Grade Robert Bob Hansen of VF-214 adjusted his goggles as the deck crew signaled. The catapult roared, and his Corsair leapt into the humid air, climbing toward the clouds. Below, the fleet prepared for the invasion of Saipan. Above, Japanese fighters were already on the hunt. The first wave of Zeros appeared like shadows against the sun. They dove in, confident as ever, their cannons flashing. But Hansen and his wingmen pressed forward, throttles wide open. The Corsair's double Wasp engine screamed, propeller biting into the air with raw power. The battle unfolded in a storm of tracers and explosions. Corsairs dove with terrifying speed, their wings slicing through the sky. Zeros twisted desperately, but the Americans pressed the attack. Hansen lined up a target, his guns blazing. The Zero erupted in flame, tumbling into the sea. All around him, Corsairs dominated. Their rugged frames absorbed punishment. Their firepower shredded enemy formations. The kill ratios were staggering, 10, 11, sometimes 12-1. Japanese pilots who once mocked the bent-wing bird now whispered of its terror. August 1945. Okinawa. The Pacific War was nearing its brutal end. Smoke curled from the shattered hills of Okinawa, and the skies were thick with the roar of engines. Among them, the Corsair still flew, its bent wings cutting through the humid air, its guns ready, its pilots hardened by years of combat. Captain Kenneth Walsh, one of the Marine Corps' top aces, banked his Corsair into a patrol. He had flown the aircraft since its earliest days, when Japanese pilots laughed at its ungainly frame. Now, after hundreds of missions, he knew the truth. The Corsair was no joke. It was the weapon that had carried the Marines through the darkest skies of the Pacific. Below, the remnants of Japanese resistance fought desperately. Kamikaze attacks still threatened the fleet, and Corsairs were often the first line of defense. Their speed allowed them to intercept suicide planes before they reached the carriers, their firepower shredding the attackers in midair. Walsh squeezed the trigger, his guns blazing, and another kamikaze disintegrated before it could dive into the ships below. By the war's end, the Corsair had achieved staggering numbers. Kill ratios of 11-1 against the Zero. Thousands of missions flown. Countless pilots saved by its rugged frame and unmatched speed. What had begun as mockery in Tokyo briefing rooms had ended in fear, respect, and defeat. For the Japanese, the Corsair symbolized the shift in the Pacific War. Their once dominant Zero had been outclassed, their pilots forced into desperate tactics. For the Americans, the bent-wing bird became a legend, a machine that embodied resilience, industrial might, and the ferocity of those who flew it. When peace finally came, the Corsair did not fade quietly. It continued to serve in Korea, its gull wings still slicing through the skies. But its legend was forged in the Pacific, where laughter turned to silence, and silence turned to fear. The bent-wing bird had been mocked, dismissed, underestimated. Yet in the crucible of war, it proved itself one of the deadliest fighters of World War II. And in the memories of those who flew it, and those who faced it, the Corsair would forever remain the predator that dominated the Pacific skies.